corn chowder and biscuits 2 ways. So we're going to start out by adding some olive oil to our Dutch oven. You could use a sauce pot if you don't have a Dutch oven. And I'm going to turn my temperature to about a medium high, about a 7. And I'm going to cut up 1 yellow onion. I'm just going to do a quick dice on it. So I'm just going to take off both sides and then do a slice to get this outer shell off. And then I'm going to cut it in half, flip it over, cut it into about fifths, and then just a nice dice. You can use Valdalia, sweet onions, or yellow onions. Red onions are better for eating raw, while white onions are better for salsas. Okay, I'm going to put in 1 diced up yellow onion. And let me get a spoon and stir it around in our oil. So it's going to give it a good stir to make sure all the pieces are coated. And I'm going to chop up. I've got about, I used the stock earlier. It's still wet from when I washed it off the other day. But I'm going to just cut off the top. This is about, it's a smaller one, so 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 stalks of celery. And I'm going to use the leaves as well. The leaves, I think, add a nice pop of color, and they also have a nice flavor as along with the stalks. And it'll add a nice pop of green into our cheddar. So I'm going to chop these up. I'm just doing a pretty thin dice because I want my stew to be done and my potato chowder to be done in like less than 30 minutes. So I'm not cutting them too thick. Finish up these last ones. And I'm going to throw these in my pot with my onions that are heating up in the oil. You know, celery and onions are from the same family, which is why they add such a good flavor to broths. And I'm going to dice up. These are 3 golden or yellow potatoes, so they're a bit more waxy. I gave them a good wash earlier, so I'm just going to cut off any of the brown parts, but I'm going to keep the skins on because I think they add a nice texture to our stew. But I'm just going to take off any brown parts, and then I'm going to chop them up into cubes, about like a 1/2 inch size cube, so not super big. Enough that they'll, small enough that they'll fit nicely on a spoon. So they kind of resemble like about that size. Not too big. A little bit bigger than if you were doing homemade hash browns. And I'm using these yellow onions or gold onions, or not onions, potatoes, because they're a bit more waxy than like an Idaho potato. And so they will keep their form nicely in stews and soups. And I'll give this a nice chop through and dice this up. And we're going to put them all in here. And we're going to let them saute up some in the oil. And I can smell the celery has already given a nice fragrant smell. Perfect. Scoop these in here. And you can see the difference. A gold potato truly is more golden on the inside than an Idaho potato or a russet. Those are going to be white and they're more starchy, while these are more waxy. This one's got a bruise on it. Chop these. We'll add them up. A funny fact about potatoes that I didn't learn about until COVID is most of the potatoes we eat were picked 5 to 7 years ago. They were harvested that long ago. What they do is when they harvest them, they put them in a really cold warehouse type thing, like piles of it, and they just sit there until they're ready to go out on the market. But we have about a 5 to 7 year stockpile of potatoes. I'm going to give these a good stir because I want to make sure I'm sauteing them all around. Nice. And break up any pieces that are stuck together. like this one right here. Break him up. He's a little big. And I'm gonna add in some ham. So this is pre-sliced. It's already cooked ham. So I'm just going to take a bit of it and I'm gonna dice it up. This will add a nice, it'll add a protein to my soup, but add a nice saltiness as well. Just open. And I'm not gonna use all of it. I think this was like a half pound or a pound slices. I'm gonna take about, I would say this much ham. This is probably a quarter pound of ham, maybe a little more. And I'm gonna just kind of dice this up into small pieces that will saute up with my vegetables. Again, this will
What's the name of the soup?
The soup, I'm making a corn and potato chowder today. So I've got in here, for those joining, I've got 1 onion, about 5 stalks of celery, and 3 large gold potatoes, sauteing up in some olive oil. Give it a good stir. I'm gonna turn down my heat just a little bit. And I like to saute up my vegetables a little bit before I add broth in, just to add a nice texture and really bring out their natural flavors. I'm gonna put up my minced up or chopped up ham in here. Perfect. And I'm gonna flip it over because we are going to move on to our biscuits while these saute up just a little bit. With a good stir. Okay, for our biscuits, these are gonna use some of my sourdough starter. So I'm gonna start out here and I'm going to use, it's 1 cup of sourdough starter. My sourdough starter, you can see, has a nice bubble to it in there. And I'm gonna give it just a good stir to mix it all up. And then I need to use 1 cup of sourdough starter. You can also use discard, so either one works. I've got 1 cup of my sourdough starter right here. I'm just gonna put my lid on and then keep it away over here. It's a little hotter over here, and I don't want my starter exposed to too much heat because it really activates it. So we're gonna start out with 2½ cups of flour. You're gonna use all-purpose because these are biscuits. So we don't want to use a bread flour that has too much gluten in it and they won't get a nice crumble, flaky texture. So we're going to add 2½ cups of flour. So 1, 2, and ½ cups of flour into our bowl. And then I'm going to add 4 teaspoons of baking powder.
Linda just sent you a bunch of roses.
Oh, well, thank you. So 4 teaspoons, which is also a tablespoon and a teaspoon. There are 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is going to be our activator. Baking powder is just cornstarch and baking soda mixed together. I'm going to give our stew a nice stir real quick. I don't want it to burn on the bottom or anything, but I want these vegetables to roast up nicely. Okay, so I've got 4 teaspoons of baking powder and 2½ cups of flour, and then I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. I've got this over here.
And we've gotten some comments that people are really enjoying it, that they just found you, so you just want to explain that you just kind of started.
Yeah, I actually just started. Everybody's been asking me to do some cooking videos and whatnot. I've never been professionally trained. I've just loved cooking since I was a little girl. I actually started cooking when I was like 13 years old. I used to make our family dinners every night. I just started it, and it was a way to earn some extra money as a kid.
Well, and as a 13-year-old, the youngest of...
Yes, I was the youngest of 7. So I started and I've loved it, and I've just learned over the years. I always said I had like an illegal kitchen in my dorm room at college. I had a hot plate and a toaster oven, and I would make all sorts of stuff in here. I added my teaspoon of salt in here, and I'm just using my whisk to whisk everything together. That way it's will mix in easy with the starter. Will mix in easy with the starter. And now I'm going to add in 1.5 sticks or 3/4 cups of cold butter. This is key. You want your butter to be cold because that's gonna lead for the nice flaky texture. I'm gonna just grab a knife out of this drawer. And when I'm cutting my butter into it, I like to just make sure I can cut it into chunks that will make it easier to chop up. You could use a food processor if you wanted to, but I've got this handy dandy pastry knife, and it works wonders. It works just as easy as using a food processor. I just don't have to clean as much afterwards. And now I'm going to add in a half of a s'more. Like a food processor, I just don't have to clean as much afterwards. And now I'm going to add in a half of a s'more stick, 4 cups of butter. And again, you want to use cold butter. I had this butter sitting on a pack of frozen corn, which we'll be adding to our corn chowder in a little bit. So I wanted it to stay nice and cold. And I'm just going to use my pastry cutter, and I'm just going to simply smash the butter into the flour like this. And what these blades are, they act like little butter knives, and they just cut just like this. And the whole point with biscuits, or if you're making a pie crust, is you want to get your butter broken down into pea-sized or smaller chunks. If you have a big chunk in there, it will melt and you'll have a pocket in your dough. So you just want to make sure you mash it real good. But you can see that this really doesn't take that much work with a pastry cutter. Now, if you were to do the really old-fashioned way with 2 butter knives, that would take forever. I've done that before. I don't recommend. Then I would say use a food processor. But if you want to invest, I think these things are like $5–10. They're really not that bad. They work great, and you just have to use a little elbow grease. So I'm almost done with that, but let me take a pause here, give this a quick stir. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this with about 4 cups of water and a big heaping spoonful of chicken bouillon. I like to use, you could use chicken broth if you wanted to. I just like to use water and chicken bouillon, A, because it takes up less space in my pantry, and B, I can add more flavor without adding more liquid. So I'm going to start with 4 cups, and I want to make sure I have all of my vegetables and everything covered. I'm going to maybe add, those are some big potatoes, maybe a cup more. So 5 cups on this, just because I had 1 really big potato in there. But not too much. And we're going to add a little bit of cream to this later to really make it a chowder. But let me turn it up. And now I'm going to get a heaping spoonful of chicken bouillon. I use the better than bouillon. You could use the cubes or the powder if you want. This is just my favorite that I've found so far. And when I say heaping one, a big heaping spoonful. And this is gonna add primarily my saltiness to my soup. So I won't have to add any more salt. It's gonna be this chicken bouillon that will add that flavor to it. And while it's also cooking, I'm gonna add in 1 bay leaf. If you remember, tried using bay leaves in your stews and soup, try it. They add a nice aromatic flavor to your broth or your stew. I turn this on, and I'm gonna bring it to a boil. When it gets to a boil, I'll add my corn in. Now we're gonna get back over to my biscuits over here. I'm gonna finish making sure I have all of these big lumps out, but you can see it's almost just looks like a really coarse flour, and that's exactly what we want. Now is the fun and the messy part. We are going to add, I'm gonna get all of these little butter pieces off. We want all of this in there because you gotta have the butter in the biscuits. So here's my cup of starter. I'm gonna add in 1 cup of starter. I'm gonna just use my little spatula here, get it all out. gonna turn these biscuits. So I'm doing a base recipe, but then I'm gonna dress them up and we're gonna have biscuits two ways. We're gonna have cheddar and green onion biscuits, and then blueberry with a lemon glaze biscuit. So it's kind of one to go with our chowder and one to have as the dessert. And then I'm going to add a half a cup of heavy cream. You can use milk or you can use half and half. I just find that the heavy cream makes a moister but flaky biscuit. So a half a cup of cream. And then the trick with biscuits is you don't want to over mix. You just want to have a light mix to incorporate them, but not to over mix them. So let me grab a wooden spatula, and I'm gonna first kind of put my flour over my liquids. Oh, you know what I forgot? Silly me, I need to add in my one egg. And one egg, I had it right here. The egg and the baking powder will react together with the starter. I'm gonna smash up and do a quick little beat right there, but they will work together to activate and make these biscuits rise and be nice and fluffy. I do have my oven preheating to 425 right now so that they will be ready to pop my biscuits in. So I'm just mixing. I'm trying not too hard to overwork it. You want it to look shaggy. So you want it to look like it's clumpy like this. That is a perfect, because I'm gonna flip it out here in just a second. And I'm going to mix my cheddar and green onions in one and my blueberries in the other one. And when we push it together, that will form, but you want to shag first because that's going to be your flaky layers in your biscuit. So I'm going to really get in here, mix it, and then I'm going to just eyeball it and put half my dough in one bowl and half my dough in another. And so I've got half. Let's see, half and half. That way we can have about equal biscuits for dessert as we have with our chowder. Okay, I think that is good. I'm going to start with my savory biscuits first. And I'm gonna use, you can use chives. I don't have chives today, but I'm gonna use some green onions. And I am going to just use the green part. I'm not going to use much of the white part, but I'm just going to do a really fine dice on these, or chop on these, because I don't want them to be too big. If you have chives, you could use scissors and just chop those off. But chives and green onions have a very similar flavor palette, and this is what we have. So they'll kind of be like a sour cream and onion. So I'll go through and now this way and just do a really quick. I'm pushing down with my hand, my front here, and then I'm just kind of lifting up and down. Kind of like this will help give more power underneath my cuts and less risk of cutting. Perfect. I'm gonna put this in here in my bowl. So that was about 2 green onions cut up real nice and fine. And let me turn our soup down. It's got a good rolling bubble on it. One thing that's nice about Dutch ovens, they retain their heat. So even though I've turned it down, it's gonna bubble like this for a few minutes. And I'm gonna take a handful of cheddar cheese. This is about, I would say, less a third of a cup. And now I'm just gonna help and use my hands to incorporate those. And I'm gonna just push it out on here because I'm gonna form our biscuit now. And it's pretty, it looks crumbly, but trust me, when I start pressing this together, it's not gonna be as crumbly as you think. And this is just the butter melding together. And if it is a little too dry, you can always add just a splash of milk, but we don't want it, you don't want super wet biscuits. Perfect. You see how I'm not trying to mix them as much as I'm folding and pushing. This is gonna give me some nice flaky layers. So I'm pushing and folding to incorporate because you want a nice flaky biscuit. And then I'm gonna try to just smush it out like this. Try to have an even thing. And then I got a biscuit cutter around here. And I'm just gonna cut out some biscuits. And I'm gonna do mine on just a circle round because I'm gonna bake them at 2 different times. I'm gonna put these in and then I'll work on the next one. Put them in here, but I've got my first one cut out, pushed around. You can see the cheddar and the green onions in there. And the rule with biscuits is you really don't want to overwork or overmix your dough. You want it to be, you want to fold it when you're smushing it together to really get those flaky layers, but not mixing it. So using your hands is probably like the best thing you do. Now I'm going to just push this together. I think I can make about one more good, or two, maybe 2 biscuits out of this. So just smushing and folding. And these will bring out the nice flaky layers. And I'm gonna pop these in the oven and they're gonna bake for about, it's around 15 minutes, but I always check after about 10 to 12 minutes. Just sometimes my oven cooks faster than I want it to. And I'm just gonna free this guy. Perfect. And I also try to make sure my biscuits are all like the same height. That way they bake evenly. Perfect. So I have them in here, spread out nicely. And I'm gonna put these in my oven over here. I have it preheating to 425. And these are gonna bake for about 10 to 12 minutes. And then you'll check on them and see if they need a little more time. So I've got my first batch in. I'm gonna put my timer on at 10 to remind me to come over here. Always use a timer. You'll forget if you don't. There's so many times that I'm like, oh, I'm paying attention, and I'm not. Okay, I've got my little crumbs over here. So I'm just gonna put these in this basket because we're gonna make our next biscuit, which is going to be a sweet biscuit. But before we head on to that one, I want to add my corn into my soup real quick so it can start cooking. I don't add my corn in right away because it cools down the broth and I really want the potatoes and them to really get heated most of the way through before I add them in. So I'm just using a small bag of frozen corn. And it adds that nice golden flavor, and I love corn chowder. So I'm gonna give it a good stir here. And we're gonna let that simmer and cook until those potatoes are completely soft. And then we'll add in some green onions and some cream at the end for some seasoning. But now we're gonna move on to our blueberry onions and some cream at the end for some seasoning. But now we're gonna move on to our blueberry biscuits. So since these are going to be more of a dessert biscuit, we're going to add a little bit of sugar to sweeten it up. So it has a nice sweetness to it versus our savory ones. I'm going to add about 1/4 cup of sugar. Not too much. And then I'm going to give it a good mix. We're going to add some fresh blueberries in, but I want to mix this sugar in first. Before I kind of put those blueberries in. There we go, just kind of get it dispersed. And then I'm gonna add just about a handful of blueberries. I already pre-washed these when we bought them because we've been having them for lunch and whatnot. So I'm gonna start a good handful. This is probably 1/3 cup of blueberries, and I'm just gonna mix them in a little bit. I'm gonna pull them out, and I'll see if I need to add a little bit more towards it. You don't want to have so many blueberries that they'll make your biscuits soggy because blueberries have a lot of liquid in them retained. And so we're just going to do this, and I'm just going to kind of fold and push, trying not to explode my blueberries yet. But trust me, you'll love these. These are delicious. They're fluffier than a blueberry scone. A scone is more tough. So these will be like a nice, fluffy, but sweet biscuit. And then I'm gonna make a lemon glaze to go on them. So I'm gonna push right here, give it a good push down. Pop these guys in, little stragglers. And perfect. You want a nice flaky edge. And I've got a piece of parchment paper. I'm gonna put this on my pan as well. And I'm gonna use my biscuit cutter just the same. I'm gonna cut through. Have a nice, you can kind of see the flaky layers in there and the blueberry. I put that on. And we'll cut out about, I think how many did we have in the other one? 5 or 6 biscuits. I'm gonna have that here too. And you could also do all savory if you wanted, or all this, but I like to change it up and have a little bit of both. Let's mix these guys together. We can make about 2 more, I think. You could also do smaller biscuits if you wanted, but I just like a nice big fluffy biscuit. Perfect. And then I have enough for about 1 more biscuit here. So each one makes about 6. So this biscuit recipe, if you started from the beginning, makes a dozen biscuits. Just kind of push it in here. Perfect. And then one thing that we're gonna do right before we put them in the oven is I'm gonna just brush them with a little bit of cream and sprinkle some sugar on top as well. And that's just gonna give it a nice little sweet shell on the outside. So let me grab one of my little brushes here. And this is what I measured my cream in earlier, so I'm just gonna pour a little bit of cream in here. You could also use milk or half and half if you wanted. You don't need enough, you just want enough for when I sprinkle the sugar over it that it will stick to it. I'm gonna do a quick sprinkle, not very much, just a light sprinkle of sugar on it. You could also use coarse dessert sugar if you had it, but I never carry that around. I typically just have granulated sugar. I like to use real ingredients that I have every day in my house when I cook. So we're gonna pop these in the oven, and these are gonna bake just as long as the other ones. So I'm just gonna look to see how much time I have used. We've got about 5 or so minutes left on these, which means these will need another 5 or so minutes after when I cook them out. But you can see they're puffing up right over there, getting nice. They still have a bit more time to cook. Now we are going to make the glaze for our dessert ones, and then we'll finish up our soup. So let me just put this out of the way over here, since we're all done with that. And then I'm gonna rinse off my knife because I've got to cut my lemon in half. So I'm gonna use a fresh lemon to make my glaze. Since I used this already, I'm just gonna use this as well. So I'm gonna squeeze in the juice of 1 fresh lemon. I'm gonna have to fish out these seeds in just a second. But the key is to use fresh lemon juice. Don't try to use like that true lemon or whatnot. That always just has a chemically taste to it. I never think it doesn't have that light lemon fresh. It tastes more chemically to me. So I'm gonna squeeze out all the juice in this, and then try to stick my thumbs up in there, get some more out of it. Perfect. And then I'm just gonna take to the side, and I'm gonna get some of these seeds out. Put it right over here for now. This is gonna make about a tablespoon of fresh lemon juice. You don't really need much more than that for it because we don't want it to be super sour.
Getting a question on how long do you bake the biscuits for?
The biscuits are about 12 minutes. Sometimes they're done a little sooner and sometimes a little longer. So I always check them at 10 and see what it is. So, and if you have like a gas oven versus an electric, that can also vary. That's why I always like to check towards the end. So I'm checking at 10 minutes and then I'll check from there to see whether they're ready based on how golden the top is. And I have it cooking at 425. I had it preheated. So I've got my lemon juice in here, and I'm gonna add in some powdered sugar to make my glaze. I'm gonna start with just a little bit. I got all my lemon seeds out. This is about a half a cup. And then I'm gonna mix it until it gets to a nice frosting level. And then this is just gonna make a nice light glaze over the top of our blueberry biscuits. And now, I'm gonna give a good stir over here. We've got our corn chowder and our potatoes cooking nicely. I'm gonna pull up a potato and check its softness, because that is when I'm gonna know that it is ready to eat. You don't want hard potatoes in here. So I'm gonna pull up one, that's why I cut them kind of small, and I'm just gonna poke a fork through. Woo! Don't do it like that. There you go. So they still need maybe a minute or two more. They're fairly soft, but you want them to be nice and tender. And then what we'll do is we turn the heat off and we'll add our cream. I don't add my cream until I'm done cooking everything else. Otherwise, it will curdle in your soup, so I always add it towards the end. So my glaze is still a little bit runny, so I'm gonna wanna add just a little bit more powdered sugar. As I said, a tablespoon of lemon juice can go a long ways with there, because it absorbs more water or sugar than you think, because it will dissolve. There. But we want just a nice sweet kind of paste on it that I can just drizzle with my spoon over the top of it. Perfect. So this is kind of the consistency that I want. And the lemon juice will cut down on the sweetness of it, but it will add a nice flavor and flavor to the biscuits to really make the blueberry pop in them, because they're not a super sweet dessert, but they are a nice dessert treat. And sometimes you just don't need 12 biscuits, but it's hard to reduce the batch. Okay, our soup over here, our corn chowder, is just about done. So I'm gonna just give it a nice stir. And before I turn it off, I'm going to taste my broth, because I want to make sure it is seasoned enough before I turn it off. And I can hear my oven baking on my beeping on my biscuits. I'm gonna add just a pinch of pepper in here. I really only have a pinch left in this one. Perfect. Give that a good stir. And now let's go check on our biscuits. I think we might be ready to take off. If not, they'll be ready by the time I finish my soup in a second. So I have it, in case you joined us late, they've been baking for 10 minutes at 425. I preheated my oven before I started here. I'm gonna pull it out. So you see they're not quite golden on the top, so I'm gonna want about 2 more minutes on these. But they've poofed up a lot. These have been baking for about 5 minutes, and you can see they've already started to rise and the sugar started to melt. So I'm just gonna put my timer on here for about 2 more minutes, so I know that they'll be about ready to come out. And we're gonna finish off our corn chowder here. So if you're joining us late, in here I used 1 yellow onion, about 5 stalks of celery, and 3 gold potatoes, and I sauteed those up with some olive oil. Then I added some diced ham, and we sauteed those together for a few minutes, added about 5 cups of water with a big heaping spoonful of chicken bouillon and a bay leaf. And we've been letting that simmer until our potatoes are soft. Now I'm going to turn off the heat, and I'm going to add in some green onions and a little bit of cream. Green onions will just add a delicate like flavor to it, but no, it won't be overpowering, it won't be super oniony. And I'm using just the green part. Just cut these off in here. For some reason, all of my regular size scissors have gone missing. So I've been using these little scissors for a while. It's my kids, I have 5 kids, and I swear they take something and it like disappears and it never comes back. And then they swear they didn't take it. And I like will go to help clean up their rooms, and I'll find like 5 pairs of scissors or all of the hairbrushes. And I'm like, I know that they don't just disappear, that they're somebody's room. So I've added some green onions, and now I'm gonna add a little bit of heavy cream. My chowders, I like to have a bit more brothy, not super thick. So it is a little bit more brothy, and it doesn't have a ton of cream in it. So I'm gonna start by adding, it was probably about 1/4 of a cup, and I give it a stir, and I kind of look at the creaminess looking in my broth, and I think I might add just a pinch more. Perfect. There we go. So it has a rich creamy color to it, but it's not a super fatty stew or corn chowder, but it is delicious nonetheless. Let me taste it, see if we need to add a pinch of anything else. Perfect. And I just heard our things beep, so I think we might be ready for our for our biscuits. So I'll stir these up. We can get our first set of biscuits out of the oven, and I can plate up. Okay, I hear you. I will say, I got these ovens last year when we remodeled our kitchen, and they don't let you forget. They will beep incessantly. Ah, nice. You can see where we're starting. We've got I'm going to close that in there, but we've got some nice gold. The cheese is melted. Let's see, I'm gonna give you know what? I feel like they are done all the way through. Perfect, we'll bring them over here. And then my last part with my biscuits that I like to do is I like to take a little bit of butter and just rub it over the top, especially these, since they are my savory biscuit. And then I'll just give them a light sprinkle of garlic salt on top. So I'm just gonna take my stick of butter here and just kind of let it melt over the top of each one, just like this.
And these are the sourdough?
Yes, these are sourdough. These are my biscuits that I use with my sourdough starter. So a cup of sourdough starter, 3/4 cup of cold butter, half a cup of half and half, 2.5 cups of flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, a teaspoon of salt, and then I added in about 1/4 cup of cheddar and some chopped up green onions. And these are my savory, and then I used my base for my other ones, and I added some sugar and blueberries to make a blueberry biscuit. And then just a light dash over this, and that's gonna have a nice savory flavor. And we can plate what our little lunch will be today. And I will say, sometimes I make my chowder with, if I don't have ham, I'll use bacon. That's also a really good alternative to it. It adds the same saltiness to it without being a super hearty, it's not a super chunky meat soup. So I'm gonna put in a nice thing and get a nice bit of our broth to it for our corn and potato chowder. And then I'll put a nice, ooh, these are still hot. Look at this. Nice, look at this, flaky. It's already like the cheese in there. Perfect. I'll dip it in. Excellent, that's really good. It pairs so nicely. I find the cheese and the green onion pair really well with the corn chowder. Let's go check on our dessert ones, and then we'll put our lemon glaze that we made over it, and we'll be done. It's super quick and easy. It's a great way if you don't want to make a huge batch of biscuits too. You can repurpose them and have them be our dessert biscuits. Look how much these puffed out right here. I'm gonna check on them, feel like that. These still need a few more minutes to cook. So what I might do, keep you guys on here for a little bit if you want to stay and watch, but I will post pictures of them when they're done. These probably need about 3 more minutes. With the blueberries in it, it adds a little bit more moisture to them, so they need to cook a little bit longer. But when they pop out, I'm just going to drizzle them here with my lemon glaze. So that was 1 fresh lemon squeezed, so about a tablespoon of lemon juice, and about, I would say, 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. And I'm gonna drizzle that over, but I'll post that picture on my page so you guys can see that. But thank you guys for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every day for you guys. And comment on some recipes if you'd like me to make those. Thanks for joining us.